Hello, my friends. Subscribe and like.
I dug into my spouse's inbox, hunting proof of disloyalty. But I uncovered a hidden health truth he kept quiet. Jenna, 34, had been married to her husband Mark for nearly 8 years. Like any couple, they'd weathered their fair share of ups and downs, but overall, their bond had always felt strong. She trusted him, at least, she thought she did. But 3 months ago, things began to shift. It started subtly. Mark began talking more and more about a new colleague named Sophie. At first, it was nothing that raised red flags, just the usual chatter about work, projects, meetings, brainstorming sessions. But over time, Jenna started noticing that Sophie's name was coming up more often than anyone else's. Mark would chuckle over something Sophie said at the office, or mention how they shared the same quirky taste in obscure music. Jenna couldn't help but take notice, not because she was the jealous type, but because the way he spoke about Sophie had a different energy. His eyes lit up. His tone changed. And then came the longer work hours, always explained away by deadlines and team projects. Jenna tried to brush off the gnawing unease growing inside her. Maybe she was overthinking it. But when she saw a message pop up on Mark's phone one evening, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. I have something to show you that'll blow your mind." Her heart dropped. He claimed it was about a work presentation, and his explanation technically made sense, but the flustered way he changed the subject only deepened her doubts. Then he started taking his phone into the bathroom during showers. He began closing the office door at home instead of working in the open, like he used to. Each small change built up, brick by brick, until Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on behind her back. And that's when the fear took over. Jenna hated the idea of snooping. It wasn't who she was, or at least, not who she used to be. But suspicion can turn even the most trusting person into someone they barely recognize. One afternoon, while Mark was out running errands, she gave in to the voice in her head that had been whispering for weeks. They had always shared passwords. Not because they snooped, but because there had never been a reason to snoop. Until now. Her hands shook as she typed in the login to his email account. She felt like an intruder in her own marriage, her heart pounding in her chest. Part of her didn't want to find anything. But another part, the part that had been losing sleep, was bracing for the worst. She searched Sophie's name. And there it was, dozens of email threads. Many were sent late at night. Some were from weekends. It was everything Jenna had feared. She clicked the most recent thread, her stomach in knots, preparing herself for the betrayal she thought was waiting on the other side. But instead, there were no love notes. No flirty messages. No scandalous photos. Instead, she found spreadsheets, guest lists, venue options, music ideas, plans. For her. Sophie wasn't Mark's affair, she was his co-conspirator, helping him plan an elaborate surprise birthday party for Jenna. Sophie knew a local band Jenna adored. Her family owned a beautiful event space. And apparently, she had a knack for organizing events. Everything Mark and Sophie had been working on, the late nights, the secrecy, the inside jokes, wasn't about romance. It was about pulling off something unforgettable for Jenna. Something that would blow her mind. And just like that, the foundation of Jenna's suspicion crumbled beneath her. What she found wasn't betrayal. It was love. As Jenna scrolled through the email thread, the picture became clearer with every message. This wasn't just a casual gathering or dinner with friends, it was a full-blown, meticulously planned celebration. Mark wasn't just throwing a party. He was building an experience. Sophie was far more than a helpful co-worker, she was the creative force behind much of it. She'd used her personal connections to secure a stunning venue Jenna had once mentioned in passing. She'd reached out to a local band Jenna loved from her college years, one that rarely played private events, and convinced them to perform. There were emails about decorations that reflected Jenna's favorite colors and aesthetics, and even one discussing a way to incorporate her favorite childhood dessert into the catering menu. Then Jenna saw something that made her breath catch. A message confirming that her favorite author, someone she'd admired for over a decade, would be making an appearance at the party. They were in town for a book signing, and Sophie had somehow managed to pull strings to bring them in for a quick visit during the event. Jenna sat back in her chair, overwhelmed. The cryptic messages, the late-night emails, the laughter over shared music, it wasn't flirtation. It was collaboration. Every detail, every inside joke, every odd moment of secrecy, it was all for her. All to give her a night she'd never forget. And with that realization came a flood of emotion, relief, of course, but also something heavier. Guilt. Mark hadn't been hiding an affair. He'd been working behind the scenes to make her feel celebrated, remembered, and deeply loved. And Jenna had assumed the worst. Jenna was just about to log out of Mark's email, still trying to process the wave of emotions washing over her, relief, shame, gratitude, when a new notification popped up in the inbox. It wasn't from Sophie. It was from someone she didn't recognize. The subject line read, help with the situation. Her heart skipped. Curiosity surged past her guilt as she clicked the message. The email began gently. I understand how difficult this is for you. Finding out about your wife's condition must be devastating. I've been through something similar with my partner, and I know how isolating it can feel. The support group meets next Thursday at the community center. Jenna froze. Your wife's condition. The words echoed in her head. She scrolled down, her hands trembling. The previous messages in the thread revealed a hidden part of Mark's world she hadn't known existed. In one of his earlier replies, Mark had written, I don't know how to handle this. The doctors are still running tests, but they mentioned the possibility of early onset Alzheimer's. She's so young, only 34. I haven't told her the full extent of their concerns yet. Sometimes she seems completely fine, and then suddenly, she forgets entire conversations. Just last week, she didn't remember how to get to the grocery store we've gone to for years. I'm terrified of what this means for our future, for her. I feel like I'm drowning. Jenna's breath caught in her throat. Her mind reeled. Alzheimer's? Me? She sat motionless, staring at the screen, confusion overtaking every other emotion. The warm relief she'd felt moments earlier was abruptly replaced by a new, colder dread. This wasn't about a party. This wasn't about another woman. This was about her, and something far more terrifying. Mark wasn't just hiding emails. He was carrying the crushing weight of a potential diagnosis, trying to find answers and support, all while protecting her from the fear he was living with every single day. Jenna stared at the screen, her pulse pounding in her ears. Her brain was trying to reject what she had just read, but another part of her was already rewinding through recent months, re-examining moments she had written off as nothing. Hadn't she been more forgetful lately? At first, it had felt harmless. She'd laughed at herself when she misplaced her keys 3 times in 1 week. She'd blamed stress when she completely forgot a video call with a coworker. She'd chalked it up to lack of sleep when names escaped her or when she showed up to lunch with her friend on the wrong day. It had all seemed manageable. Normal, even. But now, each of those incidents resurfaced like fragments of a puzzle she hadn't realized she was solving. And with each piece, dread crept in. She remembered Mark's gentle, almost cautious expression when she forgot their dinner plans with his parents, the ones they'd discussed only hours earlier. She'd brushed it off at the time, even joked about how scattered she was lately. But now, she could see something different in his face, concern. There was also the doctor's appointment Mark had insisted she attend. She'd dismissed it as him being overly dramatic about her forgetfulness. But what if he hadn't been overreacting at all? And then there were the little things she hadn't shared with anyone, the increasingly frequent times she relied on her calendar app just to keep track of the most basic tasks. The strange moment she found her phone in the fridge. Or when she walked into a room and couldn't remember why she was there. What she had convinced herself was just exhaustion or mental clutter, might be something far more serious. Her heart ached as the truth took shape. Mark hadn't been distant because of another woman. He hadn't been cold or secretive out of betrayal. He had been quietly, patiently watching the person he loved show signs of slipping away, and doing everything he could to hold things together. Still sitting at Mark's desk, Jenna kept reading. Email after email revealed just how far he'd gone, not only to understand what might be happening to her, but to support her without ever letting his fears show. He'd reached out to neurologists, asked questions about early-onset dementia, and pored through forums and medical journals. He'd contacted multiple support groups, looking for advice from people who had been where he was now, frightened, confused, desperate for answers. And all the while, he'd been protecting her from the storm quietly brewing behind the scenes. As Jenna thought back, more pieces clicked into place. Mark had begun casually repeating information, gently reminding her about appointments or plans without ever making her feel like something was wrong. When she forgot things, he didn't criticize or question her, he just calmly repeated what she'd missed, often pretending like it wasn't the second time. She remembered how their kitchen drawers had recently been labeled, little handwritten notes, ones she'd laughed at as him being extra organized. But now she saw them differently. They weren't for efficiency. They were for her. She thought of the sticky notes he'd left around the house in recent weeks. Things like, "Don't forget your keys, yellow heart," or "Lunch in the fridge, smiley face." She'd thought they were just sweet gestures. And they were, but they were also careful supports, placed like stepping stones to help her navigate the parts of life that had begun to blur. Even his affection had shifted. He'd been more tender, more present. As if trying to memorize her, or maybe make sure she could hold on to him. The depth of his love hit her like a wave. Mark wasn't just looking after her. He was fighting for her in silence, carrying the burden alone, trying to soften the edges of something that terrified them both, without letting it shatter the life they'd built. The day of Jenna's birthday arrived, and with it came a strange mixture of anticipation and heartbreak. She now understood the truth behind everything Mark had been doing, the secrecy, the late-night messages, the partnership with Sophie, but she still didn't let on. She smiled. She laughed. She pretended to be surprised when Mark blindfolded her and drove her to the party venue. But deep down, she already knew. Still, when they pulled up and the lights came on and everyone shouted, "Surprise," her heart swelled. The event was more beautiful than she could have imagined, even knowing what was coming. Her favorite music filled the room. Friends from different chapters of her life greeted her with warm embraces. The decorations, the food, the tiny details, they all whispered, "I know you. I love you." Sophie was there too, radiating warmth and joy as she hugged Jenna. Jenna held her tight, guilt prickling again for ever having doubted her. This woman had been an ally, not a threat, a source of strength for Mark when he couldn't carry the weight alone. As the party buzzed around them, Mark pulled Jenna aside. He led her into a quiet garden just outside the venue, lit by soft string lights. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his glasses the way he used to back when they first started dating. She knew that gesture. It meant something big was coming. He took her hands gently. "I have something to tell you," he said softly, his voice unsteady. "I've been waiting for the right moment. I wanted tonight to be perfect before." Jenna squeezed his hand, cutting him off before he had to say it. "I know," she whispered. "About the tests. About everything." Shock flickered across Mark's face. You know." She nodded, and for the first time in days, she let herself cry in front of him. "I found the emails," she confessed. "I thought something else was going on. I invaded your privacy, expecting betrayal, and instead I found you carrying this burden all alone." His face crumpled as he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. His body trembled with the weight of everything he'd been holding back. "I was trying to protect you," he said, voice breaking. "Until we knew for sure. The final results came yesterday, and that's why I wanted to talk to you tonight." Jenna froze. This was it. The answer. Mark looked into her eyes, holding her face in his hands. "It's not Alzheimer's," he said, barely able to get the words out. "The neurologist confirmed, it's actually a vitamin B12 deficiency. It's been mimicking dementia symptoms. But it's treatable. Completely reversible." She stared at him, stunned, her breath catching in her throat. Relief crashed over her like a tidal wave. All those worst-case scenarios she'd built up in her mind, gone in an instant. She wasn't fading away. She wasn't broken. And Mark had stayed steady through it all, right beside her, even when she didn't know she needed him most. Jenna could hardly process what Mark had just said. Not Alzheimer's. The words echoed in her mind like a lifeline being thrown into the depths of a storm she thought she'd never escape. For a moment, she just stood there, locked in his gaze, as her body caught up with the relief flooding her system. Mark explained, gently, his voice cracking with emotion. The doctors had finally ruled out early-onset Alzheimer's. What they'd discovered instead was something much more manageable, much less terrifying, a severe vitamin B12 deficiency. It had been throwing off her neurological functions, mimicking symptoms of cognitive decline, memory lapses, confusion, disorientation. All of it, the things that had made her fear she was losing her mind, had a different cause. A cause with a solution. He told her that the treatment would begin with a series of injections, followed by daily supplements. The neurologist was confident, the condition was completely reversible, and Jenna was expected to make a full recovery. She felt like she could finally breathe again. The weight she had been carrying silently, questions she hadn't dared ask herself, fears she didn't know how to face, began to lift. It wasn't the end. It wasn't a slow decline into darkness. It was the beginning of healing. Through a rush of grateful tears, Jenna let out a soft, incredulous laugh. "I'm not losing my mind," she whispered. Mark smiled, his own eyes shining. "No more than usual," he joked, brushing a tear from her cheek. They both laughed, clinging to each other, finally able to feel the lightness of hope again. Jenna stood in that quiet garden, wrapped in Mark's arms, the reality of what they'd just been through still settling around them like the remnants of a storm. Her cheeks were wet with tears, some of sorrow, but mostly relief. The emotional whiplash was overwhelming, from fearing the collapse of their marriage to believing she was facing a devastating illness, and now, finding out it was something treatable. Something temporary. They held each other for a long moment, breathing in the safety of the truth. Then came the apologies. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," Mark whispered. I didn't want to scare you without knowing for sure. I thought I was protecting you. And I'm sorry I doubted you," Jenna said quietly. "I assumed the worst. I let fear take over. I should have trusted that there was a reason, that you had a reason." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We both need to do better," he said gently. "No more secrets. Even if it's uncomfortable. Even if it's hard." Jenna nodded. "Even when we think we're protecting each other." With a soft laugh and one last hug, they returned to the party, hand in hand. But everything felt different now. Clearer. Lighter. Later that evening, once the guests had begun to leave and the noise had faded into warm background music, Jenna pulled out her phone and sent a quiet text to Sophie. "Thank you. Not just for the party, but for being there for Mark. For being someone he could lean on. I'm so grateful he had you while he was carrying all of that alone." The response came quickly. "He adores you, Jenna. He never doubted it for a second. The way he talks about you, we should all be so lucky to be loved like that." Reading that made Jenna's chest tighten in the best way possible. All the doubt, the suspicion, the tension she had built up around Sophie, all of it vanished in that single moment of honest, sisterly affirmation. Sophie wasn't just Mark's co-worker. She was a friend. A witness to his quiet strength. And someone who had stood by him when he was fighting a private battle for Jenna's well-being. This moment, this realization, became the quiet seal on a painful chapter. Not its end, but the beginning of something new, a partnership built on deeper trust, vulnerability, and the understanding that love sometimes means carrying the weight until the other person is strong enough to see it. The morning after the party, Jenna sat at the kitchen table, her coffee slowly growing cold as she stared at the calendar app on her phone. She had just finished marking her first appointment for the vitamin B12 injection when something caught her eye. Mark had already added the entry himself. Next to the time slot, he'd written, "First day of the rest of our lives, Red Heart." It hit her like a gentle wave, quiet, but powerful. In that moment, Jenna realized how deeply this entire experience had shifted her understanding of love, of marriage, of what it means to walk through life with someone. She had gone digging, expecting betrayal. She'd let fear cloud her judgment. And instead of finding a man who had turned away from her, she found one who was holding her up, quietly, invisibly, with everything he had. What had looked like secrecy had been protection. What had felt like emotional distance was actually silent devotion. And what she'd mistaken for lies, was love in disguise. Jenna had learned something she'd never forget. That relationships are fragile, not because of weakness, but because they require a constant commitment to honesty, grace, and mutual vulnerability. They're built not on perfect communication, but on the willingness to keep trying, even when it's uncomfortable. She'd seen how easy it was to get trapped in your own fears, to build a narrative in your head that doesn't match reality. And yet, she'd also learned that sometimes, the truth we fear the most can lead us to something even stronger, a deeper trust, a renewed connection, a second beginning. Later that day, as she hugged Mark from behind while he chopped vegetables for dinner, Jenna whispered, "No more secrets." He smiled without turning around and said softly, "No more fear." And just like that, they began again, not as a perfect couple, but as two people who chose to stay open, even when everything inside them wanted to hide.